My guest today is Emilee Lehenbauer, Vice President of Federal at Qualtrics. Emilee, thanks so much for taking the time to join me.
Yes, thanks for having me, Jason.
Let me set just a little bit of context for our discussion today. For much of the past decade, agencies have been trying to close the customer experience gap that developed with the private sector over the last few decades. They have customer experience dashboards to measure progress against specific goals. For example, at the Homeland Security Department, TSA PreCheck wait times or USCIS processing of naturalization applications are two of the goals the agency has been focusing on the last few years. Congress also tried to help out, passing the 21st Century Idea Act, and OMB recently issued implementation guidance setting out something like 100 different initiatives for how agencies can improve citizens' experience with agencies. While agencies have made some progress in improving how they deliver services, technology infrastructure, data collection, data use, data management, employee training all remain among their biggest challenges. So for how agencies continue to improve their service to citizens, to businesses, and to their own employees, we turn to Emilee from Qualtrics. So Emilee, let's start there. We're going to start with the workforce side of it. To improve customer experience, to improve all of this really starts with the person. If I feel empowered, if I feel like I have access to data, if I feel like I have the technology, then I can really make some changes. What is really going to drive the satisfaction? What role can the workforce play?
Sure. Yeah, I think oftentimes I appreciate you starting with the workforce because I think most of the times when people think about service delivery, you think about the end result and that interaction directly with the customer. But really, it's looking at that other side of the interaction and looking at the front line of the government workforce that is providing that service. And also the people behind the scenes that are making policy decisions and involved in program design and operational functions of that service. So it really is critical to consider the role that workforce plays and how engaged they are in that process. And right now, it is very clear we are going through a significant period of transformation across government, and the workforce has been heavily impacted. And oftentimes they bear the burden of the expectations of the American public and of their leaders are rising, and they have this high standard of effective service delivery, efficient service delivery, but the resources are more limited. So it's really, really critical to make sure that you're listening and engaging that workforce, not just about their experience as an employee, right? This isn't just about like their work-life balance or their benefits. Those facets are important, but it's also about their insights into where there is process failure or breakdown on the front lines, or even fraud, waste, and abuse. That's been a really hot topic recently of identifying where we can make improvements in saving government dollars in those areas. And really, it's the government workers that have the best insight into where those improvements can be made.
I think that sometimes gets lost in the discussion. Government workers actually, they do have the best insights in terms of, hey, how do I improve my own process? I'm in it every day, I live it. So let's talk about how to engage the workforce. What are some of those steps? What are some of those things that you've seen work or that you all do at Qualtrics to kind of say, hey, what about your process isn't so good, or how can we improve it?
Right, yeah, so it's really simple. It starts with listening, right? It starts with providing a way for those employees to provide feedback and at regular cadences and intervals when those experiences or those breakdowns are happening. So it can't just be an annual, employee engagement survey, right? That serves a specific purpose, but that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about when you see something that is, a dissatisfied customer or a process failure or a leadership decision that has like a significant impact on being able to actually effectively deliver services. They need a portal and a way to provide that feedback. And that's something that Qualtrics helps many agencies. Some of the agencies, you mentioned on fixing those customer service interactions, we're also collecting that feedback from employees and then making sure that the government leaders and the people involved in those processes have access to that real-time information so they can factor it into the decisions that they're making about how those services will be deployed.
Give me a sense of what kind of questions you ask federal employees or any employee at any company when you're asking them for feedback on their process or to improve service. Just generally speaking, I know every agency is a little different. I know each set of questions. So what are some similar topics, trends, key, enlighten us in that way?
So I think there's a very specific methodology in how you approach like employee engagement, which is, like I said, like that annual engagement survey or those employee pulses. But when it comes to the actual service delivery improvement, it's not so much the specific questions that you're asking employees as it is really those touch points and having open channels of feedback that employees can access at any time to provide that feedback in real time. So it's more about just like, while it's on their mind, while it's fresh, when something happened, that they have a way to communicate that. And then also that they trust that if they provide that feedback, that either that they have anonymity, or if they don't have anonymity, they trust that it's not going to impact them negatively, that it's really going to be used to actually improve the outcome of those processes.
I imagine because you're pointing out, hey, this isn't working, or hey, this is a problem. We have to click on this button 13 times to get it to work, or something, or it's not 3 clicks to service, but 12 clicks to get to the end result. That's maybe someone could have concern that they would be like putting down, or somehow they would feel like they are putting themselves in the spotlight. Sure. Is there ways, like, that's got to come from the top too? The leadership, as you said, has got to have access to the data, but they've also got to push down as we want to hear from you, we want to improve. That's the other side of the coin.
Right. The leadership approach to listening to employees and what they do with that feedback is most critical. If employees provide feedback and either, as you mentioned, it's used, if they feel that it's used against them in some way, or there's a detrimental impact of them sharing those insights, then of course that's going to discourage future feedback. But more, I think just as importantly, it's that their leadership and their supervisors are actually actioning the feedback that they're providing to result in a positive impact on the process or whatever service is being provided.
And that data piece, there's so much data to collect. Imagine the other side of it is, okay, what's the most important data? I could tell you in a very unstructured way, well, every time I press this button, this happens. But what are you really getting to? Well, you're getting to the point where the process is breaking down. Is there ways to help the leadership understand, okay, where is that breakdown happening and how can they go and fix it?
Sure. So I think that gets into really shifting away from like the feedback that they're getting from employees, and it's the feedback that we're collecting across every touch point in the customer journey. So that's a combination of taking solicited feedback from employees and customers, right? Customers who are on the receiving end of government services, but then also really taking unsolicited, or we sometimes call unstructured feedback, and aggregating that with the feedback that employees and customers are providing. So an example of this unstructured feedback would be the stores of very rich customer data that lives in the contact center, or in chats, or in emails, or even scraping that feedback from social media and using a tool like Qualtrics to aggregate that feedback at scale, so you have that holistic view of the customer journey, and then you can really pinpoint specific areas along that journey or identify key themes or key trends of where issues are happening so that leaders know how to prioritize improvements.
And there's so much data coming in. We're going to have to talk technology a little bit here, right? Mm-hmm. How do you deal with the volume and velocity of data, and then the structured versus unstructured? And I imagine that's where we'll hear those magical words, artificial intelligence, will play.
Of course, yes. I mean, AI is a critical part of being able to ingest and analyze and aggregate that data at scale. We've at its simplest form, even taking just a simple data call. For example, we've worked with a bureau at the State Department to do a pretty broad survey about the Foreign Service Officer experience. And there previously was a team of 5 people that spent 3 months of each year taking what was a paper survey at one point in time and inputting that data, and then categorizing and analyzing all of the open text feedback that was provided. So we can do that in real time, essentially. You disseminate the survey, you collect that feedback, and then through AI, you can analyze and also categorize and take many different cuts of that data in near real time, and also feed that data into different dashboards that people within the organization can then use to inform important decisions that they're making.
And the other side of the coin is that then you can act. You can act almost immediately. Oh my goodness, we have a problem.
Exactly.
Let's start fixing it today, versus 3 months, 5 people. Okay, now we have the data. Now someone's had to look at the data. Are you seeing that your customers are able to move more quickly?
Of course, especially when that data is being fed, like I said, in real time to the team that has the ability to act on that data. Right. So it's actually also a State Department customer. We were a trusted partner as part of the online passport renewal pilot that launched initially, which now the feedback that we collected initially as part of that pilot allowed them to iterate on that digital workflow so that they then now could launch this, full scale digitization of what was previously a very manual and long process.
I think one of the things when people think about AI is it's this whiz bang thing, like, oh, we got to add AI to it. But really what you're doing is you're just enabling that data to understand what the data is, what it says, and then how to act on it. Do you get a lot of customers who are excited for AI but not necessarily understand what it can do, or vice versa, they're afraid of it and they're like,
Sure.
we don't know if we want AI in this mess?
Yes, we've seen a lot of mixed sentiment towards AI. There are the customers that think it's the like magic switch that you flip and it does all of their work for them, or there are customers that are afraid of like, oh my gosh, if we leverage AI as part of this process or to understand the data, that there are like privacy or other security concerns that might be at play. But what people need to understand is that AI is just a tool. The technology is not inherently bad or flawed. It's the critical part of leveraging AI is the structure and policies around how that data is used to then make decisions that could have potential impacts on humans. So that's really the part of the process that people need to focus on and see AI as something as more of an enhancement to the work that they're doing.
And I think given the amount of data that's coming in and all the different, if you will, sensors or areas to collect data, you're not going to be able to keep up anyways. So you've got to find some comfort level with, okay, let me run this through my own kind of personal tool, AI tool that can then understand what's happening. And all this really is to drive improvements. Where are you starting to see some of those improvements? What are you seeing among your customers?
Sure. I think one of a customer that has recently documented some pretty significant impact from the work we did with them was this contact centers for providers. So they came to us really wanting to revolutionize that provider experience through the way that they handle change management. So we worked to install customer touch points, the customers being the providers, across their websites and customer portals, and implementing a post-transaction survey. But then in addition to that, we also ingested the data across all 6 contact centers. So this is 5 million calls a year that we ingested and transcribed and analyzed for sentiment and effort and emotion. So through this process, we were able to identify the top reasons that people were calling in. And for example, one of the number one reason that was prompting the most calls made up about 45% of all calls, 69% of repeat callers, and was costing on average $1 million a year just for this one reason. So when you're able to identify, wow, this is really significant, how can we digitize part of this process? How can we provide a way for self-service to be an option that can, eliminate some of the call volume? Then you really start seeing significant cost savings. So in the first 2 months that we implemented, this was on looking at data together with the partner, we were able to identify $6 million in cost savings and over 200 specific process improvements that team is now working on.
And the cost savings is not just is personal. It's my time as a member of the call center, and I can handle more calls.
Right.
But it's also, is the cost savings also, where's the other side of the coin for the cost savings? Because I think people may just go, well, what's the $1 million or what's the $6 million? Where's that cost savings center? Is it just my time or is it more?
Sure. So it is primarily in lowering call volume because a contact center is such a resource intensive driver of government dollars. So when you have lower call volume and you can drive customers to other digital and self-service channels and they can complete whatever transaction they're trying to complete end to end without having to pick up the phone, then the cost per service provided is much lower.
People forget that 1-800 number is free to you and me, but it's costing somebody.
Yes.
Emilee, let's take a quick break. We'll come back. We'll continue our conversation. You're listening to the discussion Innovation in Government, sponsored by Carahsoft on Federal News Network. Welcome back to the discussion Innovation in Government, sponsored by Carahsoft on Federal News Network. I'm your host, Jason Miller. My guest today is Emilee Lehenbauer, Vice President of Federal at Qualtrics. Emilee, before break, we were talking about some of the challenges of the focus on the workforce and why that was so important. Let's broaden out our conversation a little bit. A lot of the workforce now is getting new, if you will, marching orders from the White House, from Capitol Hill. There's been several laws passed. There's been some executive orders. Talk a little bit about what those are and how they're really pushing forward this idea of government transformation, specifically around, let's say, service delivery.
Sure. Yeah, there have certainly been a flurry of executive orders and other actions that have come out in this administration's first 100 days. I guess I'll start by touching on one that was codified even before this administration took office. That was the Government Service Delivery Improvement Act. And this was a piece of legislation. So as I said, it's now codified into law. That was signed into law on January 4th. And it creates a position at OMB, so a government service delivery lead for the entire government, whose job it is to coordinate across agencies and create specific metrics that are being measured across agencies to ensure that there really is a consistent, coordinated focus on how services are being delivered to the American people. And this head that sits at OMB will then coordinate with a service delivery lead that will be appointed at each agency. So this is important for a number of reasons. The fact that it's a law means that this will be a consistent area of focus from administration to administration. It's not an executive order that can change as new people come in. So I think it's really going to drive long-term improvement in customer service.
I think this was one of those bills that a lot of people were watching. They were kind of excited for as the momentum grew. Did you get a sense of how agencies are starting to look at this? And there's been so much flurry of activity. There's maybe a little bit of me that goes, oh, did that kind of get lost in the shuffle? Are you starting to see maybe pieces and parts, or what are you starting to see?
Sure, it's funny that you say that, because I had this discussion with my team just last week, even in preparing for the show today, of where are we with rolling out guidance? Has OMB issued anything? I think with all of the changes that have been issued, I think that this is somewhere in the many mandates and things that have been pushed down across agencies. It will be interesting because I think there are a lot of agencies that already had a chief customer experience officer or service delivery lead, however they designated that individual. So I think for them, it's kind of business as usual. Now there's just this protection of having a law in place to prioritize that position and create this coordinating function. I think for other agencies, this will be a new role. Of course, they're going through a lot of transition and downsizing some of their workforces. So I think on the other side of that process, during the rebuilding phase, this will be a key leadership position that will be identified going forward.
We know we've had the 21st Century ID Act. That took way too long for implementation and guidance to come out. Let's hope OMB is a little quicker on this one, because I think this is just building upon a lot of the work that's been going on in the last 5, 7, 10 years. There's other statutes. There's a focus on efficiency and effectiveness. Of course, it's the latest key buzzwords. What other statutes or what other executive orders are standing out to you that kind of are driving home this point?
Sure. I think there was an interesting executive order that came out a couple of weeks ago on commercial cost-effective solutions. So what that means is prioritize for government agencies when they're looking to purchase a solution or product or technology, that they are selecting first commercial off-the-shelf solutions rather than something that is homegrown or custom built. The reasons for that is a lot of the commercial solutions are going to be more cost-effective and also candidly more innovative. So Qualtrics as a company, for example, 40% of our workforce are dedicated engineers and product development staff. So they're focused on constantly staying on the cutting edge of innovation to make our company competitive. Our company, which is largely a commercial practice with an important public sector and government function as well. But the demands of those commercial companies, when they're being evaluated, their customer service means that is driving profitability and growth and all the things that are evaluating a commercial company. So when you take those solutions and apply them to the government sector, there really are a lot of gains in how you're improving the experience for your customers as well.
I'm glad you brought up the commercial EO. That is not. I had a conversation with the folks at OMB on this and said, well, this isn't new. What's the new push here? Why do you think? And it was an interesting conversation because every agency thinks they're a snowflake, and there's certain things where, the 80-20 rule, 80% of what we all do is the same as that 20%. When it comes to customer experience and government experience, do you find that 80-20 rule is more like 95-5 or 98-2? Like measuring and understanding the data, is it the same everywhere, in private sector, public sector, generally speaking?
I guess I'm going to reference a statistic that came out in our 2025 government trends report. So this evaluates the experiences that people have with their governments globally, right? So not just in the US, but globally. And there was a 16-point difference documented in the customer satisfaction that people have with a commercial company versus a government institution. I think there's a lot of factors that are driving that, but I think, like I referenced earlier, the drive and the constant pressure for growth and profitability that commercial sectors face that forces innovation is actually, it's almost a plus for them, as to where sometimes governments are slowed down by the bureaucracy. And I know there's a lot of focus on eliminating some of that right now. And I think that government workers they're also excited to have less bureaucracy, because they are very, very motivated to deliver effective services for citizens and the people that they serve.
The biggest challenge I've heard over the years when it comes to especially like improving customer experience is usually the Paperwork Reduction Act. And this goal is just to, can we just get past it already? Because you're collecting data, okay, that's paperwork. How do we reduce it? Well, they have to get approval. I think we could probably spend the whole segment on that. Let me shift gears a little bit and talk a little bit about, we talked just a little bit about AI, but on the same theme of that is this idea of security, governance, and really understanding, okay, how do we make them both accessible, but at the same time confident in what you're using? What are some of those things that you're seeing around kind of finding that right balance?
Sure. I think we talked a little bit earlier in the first segment about that, there's almost a looming fear or uncertainty of what AI can mean when that technology is applied to deliver government services or make decisions that impact citizens. And I think it's important to remember this administration is taking a much more forward-leaning, pro-innovation approach, but there are still measures in place included in some of the executive orders and the memorandums that OMB has issued to differentiate between like a low-risk activity versus a high-risk activity, and there's more documentation and process involved for high-risk activities. There are still important protections in place anytime privacy or security implications are at play to kind of combat some of the fears out there and ensure that AI is still being used in a way that will do no harm.
I think as agencies are kind of diving in there, they're setting up these AI governance boards. They're setting up kind of, okay, how to build security in from the front side. Are there maybe questions you get often from your government customers or potential customers about the security governance side of, okay, well, how are we going to use that data, or where does that data store? Or what are some of those common things that you hear? Sure.
I think a lot of the customer questions are informed by the FedRAMP authorization guidelines that governs these security policies. And I'm actually excited to see that they're, the FedRAMP 20X guidelines that were recently released to really automate some of the review that was happening as part of that process, and also expedite some of those approvals. Qualtrics as a company has invested heavily in security and compliance. I think it's really important, even as all this transformation is happening, that we still have that foundation of making sure that we're delivering secure, reliable solutions. So we've gone through that process and are on the verge of FedRAMP High, hopefully by June, pending final approvals, and also achieving IL4 status, which is really important for our defense practice as well. So those questions are informed by customers, and I think if agencies could lean in more to accepting that FedRAMP authorization, as the FedRAMP Act that was passed last year dictated, that, and they don't have to go through this lengthy individual specialized ATO process at the agency, I think that really could create a lot of efficiencies across agencies in implementing and modernizing solutions.
I've been covering FedRAMP for a long time. I know that's a common complaint about it, is that the levels that they add, this layer cake of security that they add, nobody wants less security, but nobody wants to go through this continuous problem. And I know Pete Waterman over at FedRAMP is working hard to kind of make some interesting changes. We just got a couple minutes left in our discussion. I've enjoyed it very much. What's the big message you want to make sure you're leaving the audience with when it comes to improving customer experience, when it comes to kind of empowering employees to really drive this change?
I think the most important area where Qualtrics as a company wants to lean in to help agencies achieve what have been clearly set out as mandates of this administration, delivering service more effectively, being more efficient in the way that government operates. When we partner with agencies to create this holistic view of the customer journey and ingest, all of the data that exists across both solicited data from surveys or web forms, and combining that with the unstructured data that lives in places like the call center, you really do understand where improvements can drive the most impact, which allows you to prioritize them both from a resource of money and people, but also a time perspective, right? Like which improvements are the most critical for us to go to address first, and what will give the greatest benefit and feel in the way that service is being delivered to citizens. I think one of the other key points is making sure that we take time to evaluate the strategy for listening to and engaging the federal workforce. I think there's been a lot of as part of this transformation process, there has been a lot of disruption to the federal workforce. And I think there are certainly risk of long-term impacts in how services are provided and the quality of those services if we don't find a way to make sure that government workforce feels empowered and motivated and connected to the mission that they're delivering on. And then I think one of the really important ways that Qualtrics can partner with different agencies during this time is being a connector, right? We work with a lot of teams that are focused on customer experience or employee experience, and we like to bring those teams together and share insights and really have that community feel. Because what I do find with the many government employees that we have the privilege of interacting with in the work that we do is that they are truly motivated in delivering quality services to the American people. They are motivated by the missions that they are connected to, and they are more engaged when they have opportunities to drive improvement in the way that they're delivering that work.
I think prioritization is key. Understand where you can make the biggest impact at whether it's cost or improves delivery, and then obviously keep the workforce at the center of all that. I think that's great advice. Emilee, unfortunately, we're out of time for today. I very much enjoyed our conversation. So let me thank my guest. Emilee Lehenbauer is the Vice President of Federal at Qualtrics. Emilee, thanks so much.
Great. Thank you for your time today, Jason.
I'm Jason Miller, and you've been listening to Innovation in Government, sponsored by Carahsoft on Federal News Network. For more on this discussion, visit federalnewsnetwork.com and search innovation.